I'm Alina, 31 years old, and until a few months ago, I really thought I had life figured out. I work as a freelance graphic designer. I've got a small circle of good friends, a decent savings account, and a home I inherited from my grandmother. Nothing fancy, just a cozy two-story with a creaky porch and an overgrown lilac bush in the front yard. But it's mine. It was the house I grew up in after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. My grandmother raised me here. She cooked pancakes every Sunday morning, planted tomatoes in the backyard, and made the place smell like vanilla and old books. When she passed 3 years ago, she left the house to me in her will, along with a note that simply said, "Protect what's yours and never let love make you blind to paper." Back then, I didn't fully get what she meant. Now it echoes in my head every time I walk through these rooms. I met Mark 2 years after I moved back into the house. It was one of those random, almost cinematic moments. I was attending an open house event with my friend. She's a realtor and wanted a second opinion on some staging ideas. Mark was there, all confident posture and easy smile, showing off the property like he'd personally built it brick by brick. He was charming in that effortless, practiced way that makes you think he's seen 1,000 faces and remembers each one. When he looked at me, it felt like he paused. We started talking about architecture, then music, then about how both of us had lost someone close early in life. He said it with such calm empathy that it disarmed me. I remember thinking, finally, someone who gets it. By the end of that night, we had exchanged numbers. By the end of the week, we had gone on 2 dates. Within a month, I was hugged. Mark was the kind of man who filled a room. He had this quiet confidence that made you feel safe and excited all at once. He worked in real estate, successful enough to afford a nice car and weekend trips, but not arrogant about it. Or so I thought. When he first came over to my place, he looked around and said, "This place has so much potential." I took it as a compliment, though something about his tone sounded more like assessment than admiration. Still, he cooked dinner that night, insisted on doing the dishes, and by the time he kissed me goodbye at the door, I felt lighter than I had in years. He made me laugh, made me feel like I wasn't just existing inside these old walls, but actually living again. 8 months later, he moved in. It just made sense. Or at least that's what I told myself. I loved him, and the house was big enough for two. He offered to help with utilities and groceries, though he never paid rent. After all, I owned the place outright. I didn't mind. I figured we were building a life together, sharing space, sharing dreams. At first, it was small changes. He replaced my grandmother's lace curtains with gray linen ones. Then he repainted the living room a modern slate, saying it'd make the space feel bigger. I missed the warm beige walls, but I shrugged. It was just paint. He said he was adding value. I let him. I told myself that relationships were about compromise, that home was supposed to evolve as two people grew together. Looking back, I think I confused control for care. A year in, things felt perfect, at least on the surface. We got engaged after a weekend trip to Colorado. He proposed at sunrise on a mountain trail, kneeling on one knee with a ring that sparkled like the morning itself. I cried, of course. I said yes before he even finished the question. My friends were thrilled, my sister Maya was over the moon, and for the first time since my grandmother died, the house didn't feel empty anymore. Mark started talking about our future. He'd say things like, "When we remodel the kitchen," or "Once we refinish the floors, the property value will jump." I thought it was endearing that he cared about building something solid for us. I didn't realize he was already talking about ownership. Still, I loved his ambition. Mark was driven in ways that inspired me. He worked long hours, chased sales, and networked like it was second nature. He'd come home exhausted but glowing with pride after closing a deal. He'd pour 2 glasses of wine, hand me one, and tell me I was the reason he could keep pushing. He'd say, "You're my calm." I'd smile, feeling warm and chosen. Every time he kissed my forehead, I believed he meant it. I didn't see the subtle shifts, the way he started making decisions for both of us, or how he'd phrase things like, "We should consider refinancing," as if "we" meant him. He'd joke about me being too soft for business, and I'd laugh it off. Love makes you forgiving in the wrong way sometimes. My grandmother's house had always been my anchor, a reminder of where I came from and what it took to survive. Mark made it feel like a launching pad. He told me he saw potential in me, that together we could make this house something bigger, better, ours. I didn't know then that his version of ours came with conditions. I didn't see that while I was opening my heart, he was quietly measuring what it was worth. But that's how love stories usually start, right? With soft lighting, shared dreams, and small compromises that don't feel like losses until much later. Back then, all I saw was a man who loved me and a home filled with memories and a future that felt safe. I didn't realize I was standing in the very house that would one day test whether love was stronger than greed. It started subtly, like a hairline fracture you don't notice until the mirror finally splits. A few months after our engagement, Mark became restless. He'd stay up late in the home office, typing furiously, whispering on calls I wasn't supposed to overhear. When I'd peek in and ask who he was talking to, he'd flash that easy smile and say, "Just work stuff, babe. Go back to bed." At first, I believed him. He was always ambitious, always chasing the next big deal, and I wanted to be the supportive fiancé. But then came the small lies, the networking dinners that stretched past midnight, the texts he'd clear before I could glance at his screen, the credit card bills with charges I didn't recognize. Once, I saw a $600 dinner charge from a restaurant in a city he wasn't supposed to be in. When I asked about it, he laughed and said, "Client meeting, don't be jealous of the steak." He said it like I was being ridiculous. But something in my gut twisted hard that night, and it didn't untwist again. The house, once a place of laughter and warmth, began to feel different, colder somehow. Mark had started calling it the property. He'd say things like, "The property's location is solid," or "We should get this place appraised after the remodel." He even drew up plans for a second-story balcony and a pool in the backyard. I told him I didn't want to change too much, that this house had history, that my grandmother's touch was still in every corner. He shrugged and said, "History doesn't pay bills, Elena. You need to start thinking like an investor." The word "need" stuck with me. That's when I realized our conversations had turned into instructions. He wasn't asking anymore. He was steering. I wanted to believe it was love dressed up as leadership, but the tone was shifting. Slowly, my opinions became interruptions. By spring, he convinced me to co-sign a home equity line. "Just for improvements," he'd said. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the papers spread out between us, the pen trembling slightly in my hand. Something about signing my name next to his made me feel exposed. "It's just paperwork, babe," he'd said, kissing my shoulder. "We're building a life together, remember?" And I wanted that so badly that I ignored every instinct screaming at me to pause. I signed. That same week, contractors started showing up. Walls came down, cabinets disappeared, and suddenly my grandmother's cozy beige kitchen became a sleek white showroom. It looked like something out of a design magazine. Perfect, cold, and nothing like home. It wasn't just the house changing, it was Mark too. He became sharper, less patient. He'd get irritated if I questioned expenses or asked about timelines. Once, when I mentioned that the remodel costs were spiraling beyond the budget, he snapped. "Do you even understand how business works, Elena? You sit here drawing logos while I'm out building something real." The words hit me like a slap. He apologized later, brought flowers, said he was just stressed. I forgave him, of course. That's what love does. It excuses, it rationalizes, it bends until it almost breaks. But that night, I cried in the shower, wondering when exactly the man who used to cook dinner and make me laugh turned into someone who made me feel small. Then there were the whispers, little things that didn't add up. A neighbor mentioned seeing Mark showing our house to someone, a young woman, while I was at work. When I confronted him, he looked at me like I was crazy. You really think I'd sell our home without you? God, Elena, you've got to stop listening to gossip. He walked away before I could answer. Later that night, I found a folder in his desk labeled Property Portfolio. Inside were printed listings, our address included, along with market comparisons and valuation notes. My heart pounded so hard, I thought I'd throw up. When I asked him about it the next morning, he didn't even flinch. "It's for insurance documentation," he said smoothly. "Relax." But his eyes didn't match the calm in his voice. The final straw came one rainy Thursday afternoon. I got a call from the bank about the refinancing documents they'd received. My stomach dropped. I hadn't signed anything new. When I asked what name was on the file, the woman said, "Both yours and your husband's." Husband. We weren't even married yet. I drove home in a daze, rain smearing across the windshield like gray silk. When I got there, Mark was on a call, laughing, pacing the living room that used to smell like my grandmother's lavender polish. I stood there, dripping, staring at the man I'd promised forever to. When he hung up, I asked quietly, "Why is the bank calling me your wife?" He hesitated, just a flicker, then said, "Because soon you will be." His tone was calm, too calm. I pressed further, asked about the refinancing. That's when the mask slipped. "You don't understand how hard I've worked for this. Do you have any idea how much equity you're sitting on? We could have doubled it by now if you weren't so emotionally attached to this old place." The argument that followed wasn't loud, but it was lethal. Every word cut deeper than shouting ever could. He said I was sentimental, weak, naive. I said he was manipulative, greedy, unrecognizable. He told me I was lucky to have someone willing to manage my mess. I told him he was the mess. He slammed the door and left that night, his taillights glowing red against the wet street until they vanished. I didn't sleep. I sat in the half-remodeled kitchen, staring at the walls that used to hold laughter, now bare and echoing with silence. I realized my grandmother's warning, never let love make you blind to paper. The papers I'd signed, the trust I'd handed over, the home I thought was safe, all of it suddenly felt like a trap I'd built myself. The morning after Mark left, the silence in the house was unbearable. It wasn't just the absence of his voice, it was the echo of everything unsaid. I made coffee, but couldn't drink it. The house smelled of paint and plaster dust, the unfinished remodel sitting there like an exposed wound. I wandered through the rooms, touching the walls that no longer felt like mine. My grandmother's portrait was still hanging in the hallway, crooked from when Mark moved furniture last. I straightened it and whispered, "I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have listened." Her note, the one she left with the deed, was still in my desk drawer. I pulled it out again, my hand shaking. "Protect what's yours." I finally understood what she meant. Not just the house, but myself, my name, my worth. I'd been so busy trying to build a future with him that I hadn't noticed he was building an escape route for himself. That same day, I went to the bank. I needed answers, real ones, not the polished explanations Mark gave when I questioned him. The banker, a woman named Denise, pulled up the file and frowned as she scrolled. "It looks like there's a refinance application under both your names," she said carefully, "and an ownership adjustment request pending review." My stomach turned. "Ownership adjustment?" I asked. She nodded. Yes, it would transfer a percentage of the property into joint ownership. I felt the blood drain from my face. "But I never signed that," I said. Denise looked confused. It's electronically signed, both parties. She turned the screen toward me. And there it was, my signature, my name written in my handwriting. Only it wasn't me. It was a near-perfect forgery. I stared at it, numb, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Can you tell me who submitted this?" I asked. She hesitated. "It came from his email, Mark R. Donnelly." I felt like the floor tilted beneath me. I went home shaking. Every breath felt like I was inhaling dust. I dug through the office drawers, searching for anything, emails, documents, proof, and I found it. A printed agreement between Mark and a real estate investment firm, dated 2 weeks earlier. It detailed a joint venture sale of the property with my signature at the bottom again. The sale price was listed. The closing date was scheduled for next month. My name wasn't just being used, it was being erased. He'd planned everything: the remodel to raise the value, the refinance to gain leverage, and the fake signatures to transfer ownership. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. For a few minutes, I couldn't even move. I just stood there, staring at the page, my entire relationship collapsing into one horrifying truth. I was never his partner. I was his project. The betrayal hit in waves. Rage, disbelief, heartbreak, all tangled together. I called him over and over, but he didn't answer. I texted, "I know what you did." Still nothing. Around sunset, I got a message from an unknown number. "You're overreacting. Stop making this harder than it needs to be." My chest tightened. It was him. I typed back with shaking fingers, "You forged my signature." His reply came quick. "You'll thank me when this is over. You're emotional right now. I'm doing what's best for both of us." My eyes blurred with tears. The audacity of it, but calm, patronizing tone made me sick. He thought he could steal my home, gaslight me into silence, and still sound reasonable. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I kept imagining him walking back in like nothing happened, claiming it was all business. The next morning, I called Maya, my sister. We hadn't talked much since she moved to Denver, but when she heard my voice, she knew something was wrong. I told her everything. There was silence for a beat. Then she said, "Elena, you need to call a lawyer right now." Her certainty jolted me into action. She emailed me contact info for her friend's attorney, a property fraud specialist. I spent the next day gathering everything: emails, bank statements, screenshots, text. I felt like a detective in my own life, piecing together the version of events Mark had tried to rewrite. When I met the lawyer, a woman named Carrie, she listened quietly as I spoke, then leaned forward and said, "You have enough here to prove intent to defraud, but we need to act fast. If that sale closes, it'll be harder to reverse." Hearing those words felt like being slapped awake. That night, I called Mark again, one last time. He answered this time, his voice smooth as ever. "Elena," he said, "I was going to tell you everything. I just needed time." I laughed bitterly. "You forged my name, Mark. You tried to sell my grandmother's house." He sighed. "It's not like that. You're too sentimental to see the opportunity here. I was fixing things, creating something bigger. You'd still have your share." I could barely breathe. "My share? It's my house." He went quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "Not for long." The line went dead. I stood there staring at the phone, my reflection trembling in the dark window. For the first time, I realized how dangerous his calmness was. It wasn't anger driving him. It was entitlement. He genuinely believed he had the right to take what was mine. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, signatures, and adrenaline. Carrie filed an injunction to freeze the sale. We reported the forgery to the authorities. The bank began its internal investigation. For once, the paper trail that Mark had built turned against him. And as I sat in the lawyer's office signing legitimate documents this time, my hands still shook, but for a different reason. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry, furious even. Furious at him for what he'd done, and furious at myself for letting him get so close to everything sacred in my life. But anger, I realized, could be fuel. I went home that evening, walked into the half-finished living room, and looked around. The gray walls, the modern fixtures, the soulless decor, it all looked like him. So I grabbed a bucket of paint and started covering it back up. Stroke by stroke, I erased his presence. By the time the sun rose, the walls were warm beige again, just like before. When the legal notice finally reached him, courtesy of my lawyer, he tried to call. I didn't answer. He sent a dozen texts, all versions of the same manipulation. We can fix this. You're overreacting. I still love you. I deleted them one by one because the truth was, love had nothing to do with it anymore. This was about reclaiming what was mine, what he had tried to turn into a business transaction. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. The kind that doesn't come from comfort, but from clarity. I knew the fight wasn't over yet. There would be hearings, paperwork, more memories to unpack. But at least now I was standing on solid ground. My own ground. And for the first time since meeting Mark, I didn't feel small. I felt strong. The court hearing came faster than I expected, maybe because I hadn't realized how much time had already passed. Weeks blurred into months while paperwork moved, lawyers talked, and my house sat half renovated, like an open wound waiting to heal. When the day arrived, I stood in front of the courthouse, the sky overcast, wind biting through my coat. Mark was already there. He looked the same, expensive suit, confident smirk, that same calm arrogance that once felt magnetic. But this time, I saw through it. He wasn't charming anymore. He was desperate. When our eyes met, he gave a slight nod, as if we were partners walking into a meeting. I didn't nod back. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old wood and coffee. My lawyer whispered, "Just tell the truth. That's all you need." I did. Every detail, every lie, every forged signature. Mark sat there, still as stone, his hands folded neatly in front of him. When it was his turn, he tried to spin it as a miscommunication, said I'd agreed verbally. But the evidence spoke louder. The forged documents, the bank emails, the fake notary signatures, they told the story he couldn't charm his way out of. Afterward, as we left the courtroom, he caught up to me in the hallway. "Elena, wait," he said softly. His voice was low, pleading. "You don't have to destroy me like this." I turned to face him. "You did that yourself." He flinched like I'd hit him. "I was trying to build something for us," he said, desperation cracking through the smoothness. "We could have had everything." I stared at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You mean you could have had everything?" For a second, he looked like the man I'd first met, the one who made me laugh, who held me close. But then the mask slipped again, and I saw what he really was, someone who mistook love for leverage. I walked away. Behind me, I heard him mutter, "You'll regret this." But I didn't, not for a single second. The following weeks felt strangely calm. The court froze the cell permanently and began investigating him for fraud. My lawyer called one morning and said, "They're filing criminal charges. You'll get full title restoration." I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there in silence. The air in the house felt different that day, lighter somehow, as if the walls themselves were exhaling. The contractors had long stopped coming, leaving behind boxes of tiles and paint samples that no longer mattered. I decided to finish the house myself. Slowly, weekend by weekend, I repainted, repotted, rearranged. My friends helped. Maya flew in from Denver, bringing wine and too many snacks. We laughed for the first time in months. She said, "You're finally glowing again." I smiled and said, "I'm finally home again." That night, we sat on the porch with blankets and talked about Grandma, how she always knew people's true intentions long before they showed them. I told Maya about the note again. "Protect what's yours," I said softly. She nodded. She meant this moment. But peace didn't come overnight. For weeks, I'd wake up half expecting a text from Mark, another apology or a manipulation disguised as love. Sometimes I even missed him, at least the version I thought was real. That's the cruel part about betrayal. It doesn't just steal your trust in someone else, it steals your trust in your own judgment. I'd look in the mirror and wonder how I hadn't seen it coming. But healing isn't linear. It's slow, messy, and full of tiny victories, like not checking your phone, like sleeping through the night, like standing in your kitchen and realizing it's quiet because it's peaceful, not empty. I started therapy, picked up more design clients, and even began restoring the garden my grandmother once tended. The soil felt grounding beneath my hands. With every seed I planted, it felt like reclaiming another small piece of myself. One evening, just as summer was setting in, I heard a car pull up outside. My heart jumped, old fear instinct. But when I looked out the window, it was him, Mark, standing by his car, hands in pockets, eyes tired. He looked smaller, like a man who ran out of scripts. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I opened the door, stepped onto the steps, and said, "You shouldn't be here." He nodded. "I know." He walked closer, but stopped at the bottom of the steps. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." His voice was quiet, real this time, not rehearsed. "You don't have to forgive me, I just needed to say it." I studied his face. There was no smugness left, no charm, just exhaustion, maybe even regret. "You hurt me," I said simply. "You almost took everything from me." He swallowed. "I know. I thought if I could make it work financially, it would fix everything else." I shook my head. "You can't buy trust, Mark. You earn it." He looked down, then back up. "You were the only real thing I ever had." And for a second, I almost pitied him, but pity isn't love. I nodded once, turned and closed the door. That night, I sat in the living room, lights dimmed, and listened to the sound of crickets outside. The house felt alive again, but in a different way, like it had endured something with me. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden, where the first sprouts were beginning to show. My grandmother's lilac bush had started blooming again, purple and wild, just like it used to. I smiled. There was something poetic about that, how things grow back even after being neglected, even after the storms. I decided that the house wasn't just a symbol of my past. It was proof that roots can survive even when everything above ground collapses. I poured myself a glass of wine, curled up on the couch, and let the quiet fill the spaces where fear used to live. For the first time in a long time, I felt not just safe, but whole. A few weeks later, I got a letter from the court confirming the final ruling. The property was mine, fully and legally. I pinned the document inside my grandmother's old recipe book, right under her note. It felt like closing a circle. I didn't cry this time. I just stood there, feeling steady. Outside, the sun was setting over the porch, painting the walls gold. The air smelled like lilacs and fresh paint. Life wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was mine again. I walked outside barefoot, felt the cool wood beneath my feet, and whispered, "I protected it, Grandma. I protected me." Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a car passed, the world went on. And so